Okay. As Noah mentioned, I'm the chief legal officer for the Arc of Indiana, and part of that role is to track what's happening at the state house and the federal government to see what changes are going to be impactful for our organization and everyone's organizations and people with disabilities generally. So Noah asked if I would come on and talk about this bill that just passed called they're calling it the Big Beautiful Bill. So I wanted to give some brief updates about what we know is going to happen from the bill, some things that we should be looking out for, and then answer any questions that you all might have. Um, I'm going to preface everything by saying we don't know exactly what's going to happen at the end of everything, right? We know what the bill does and some of the changes that it does, but how that's going to affect all the way down the line, we don't know yet. And that's just something that we're going to have to do as advocates, really pay attention to and continue to tell stories and advocate for bad things not to happen like we have been doing this whole time. All right. So I'm sure you have all heard about the quote unquote big beautiful bill. Um, that is actually what the title of the bill was. It was the big beautiful bill. So that's why it was being called that as well. But it was the federal budget bill that Congress was negotiating and voting on and ultimately passed. So this is the bill that the federal government um, spends all of their money and details how they're going to spend all of their money. This is what's contained in the big beautiful bill. So it's very, very impactful because any money that the federal government spends is going to be detailed how or what in this bill. And so again, there was a lot of advocacy from the very beginning of the year, even beyond that, before that, on specifically Medicaid, right? And protecting Medicaid and individuals who utilize Medicaid, and so that there wouldn't be massive cuts to Medicaid that we would be concerned about. We knew that there probably were going to be cuts. We just didn't know what that looked like. Well, now we do. So the federal budget bill, it was ultimately passed by Congress. To give you a kind of some timeline, they've been working on it for months, and they always set a goal of having it passed by July 4th. That was not a required deadline at all. They just said we want to pass by I think President Trump said he wanted to pass by July 4th. So Congress, both the House and the Senate, worked hard to try to quickly move this bill through to pass it, and they ultimately did. So it's got to go through. There's the House of Representatives and there's the Senate and Congress. It's got to pass both sides of that to be able to become a law. The House first did their and passed their version of the bill on May 22nd. At that point, it goes to the Senate. The Senate discusses, negotiates, and changes things. And then they passed their version of the bill by July 1. And then they both had to come together and come to an agreement on the bill. And that ultimately happened before that July 4th deadline. So it passed around around the 4th of July. I think it may have been the 3rd of July. And so it is now law. I wanted to touch on specifically some of the Medicaid changes that's happening from a federal level and how this may trickle down. The first thing, and a lot of this is probably things you've heard in the news. So I wanted to answer any questions. The problem is that during the few months of negotiation in the House and the Senate, there were a lot of things proposed that didn't make it. There were a lot of rumors that weren't true. And so a lot of things were being discussed and maybe even in the news that may not have actually happened. So I wanted to, take the time to actually discuss what is actually in the bill. The first thing is the work requirements for Medicaid. You've probably heard about these. This was also included in the state legislature that they passed for the Healthy Indiana plan. The federal government also passed that and basically says if you're 19 to 64, you need to either work, go to school, or volunteer 80 hours a month. But there are some exceptions, including people with disabilities can be exempt from that, but it's not automatic. So it's going to be really important when those requirements come down to see actually what is required. There will be forms probably required for it. So it's going to be important to see what the forms are and fill them out timely. I think that's going to be a theme about everything. A lot of the things that changed in the bill is forms, documentation, and being timely and submitting things on time. Okay. Because they're adding a lot of these hoops to jump through And it's important that even if somebody, for instance, is eligible for Medicaid, that they could lose Medicaid if you don't timely turn in paperwork properly. Okay. So it's really important that when there are new rules, that we're following the new rules. If you're get things in the mail, make sure you're timely checking the mail. If you need help filling out paperwork, get someone to help you fill out the paperwork. But it's really important to do that on time. One of the next big things is more frequent eligibility checks. Right now, it's a yearly eligibility that you are re-eligible for Medicaid. They're going to make it every 6 months. Again, more paperwork, more phone calls, more chances for mistakes, honestly. So it's going to be important to pay attention to deadlines, pay attention to mail, fill out paperwork on time. And again, if you need help from someone to fill it out, get help to fill it out, because it's going to be important to timely fill out anything changing on eligibility requirements. There's going to be some requirements for the states to report more to the federal government. Yeah, is your question? Okay. So this is going to be on the state, on each of the states to answer more questions of the federal government about how they're spending Medicaid money. That's probably not going to directly impact anybody here, right? But it's going to cost the state more time and money to do that. So that may shift where they're spending their money so that they're answering, responding to, say, audits or getting checked more by the federal government. So that'll be interesting to see kind of how that changes. Another big change is in Medicaid. Medicaid's a federal program, right? And so they send money to the state for these services, but the states have to pay a certain amount to match to get that federal money down, right? So there's a state match that the state government has to pay to be able to pull down that money from the federal government. Every state does it differently on how they fund their piece of the pie. This bill changes some of how that can be done by states. And so it's a little complicated, but one of the things that Indiana does, it's called a hospital assessment fee. And it's a way for the state of Indiana to get some of that money from hospitals to pull more money down from the federal government, and then they reimburse the hospitals what that costs. The federal government saying you can only do so much of that. And so we currently do a lot of that, and they're saying you can't do as much of that. And so what that's going to change is how the state of Indiana funds their piece of the pie. And that's something we're just not sure how that's going to change. We know it's going to change, but we don't know how it's going to change. And the state's got to make decisions to determine how they're actually going to change how they're raising the money, how they're dedicating the money to really pull down that federal money for the Medicaid. So that's really going to be a big one that I'm going to be paying attention to in the coming months and years, to really see how Indiana makes decisions on related to how the federal government's limiting how they can raise their money. So ultimately it may be changing services, it may be lowering provider payments, changing how Medicaid works. Like, these are big decisions that the state's going to have to make that we simply don't know how they're going to do it. And that's something that we're going to be paying attention to as the time goes on. So, those are the big Medicaid changes. I think the highlight here is that there are going to be more hoops to jump through, right? There's going to be more paperwork to fill out. It's frankly going to be harder to keep Medicaid because you need to help. You need to complete the forms and track your eligibility and make sure you do everything timely. So that's going to be the really important part. It's really important to stay connected with groups like the ARC and obviously Self Advocates of Indiana. If there are questions that are confusing about what the new rules are, ask them. We're going to do our best to get information out as we know it on new requirements and how things are going to work so everyone stays informed, because I think it's going to be really, really important for people to stay informed about what these changes are and what people need to do that maybe they didn't used to do in the past because it's a new requirement. I think that another important thing is continuing to share your story, that if you receive Medicaid let people know, especially lawmakers and people that are making decisions, how impactful and how positive that Medicaid is in your life. You know, we've been doing that all year. We've been doing it as it went in as the legislative session was in the state house. We were doing it in the federal legislature because we knew this bill was coming. But now that this bill passed, that doesn't stop the need for that, right? This stuff is going to trickle back down to the state, and the state's going to have to make big decisions. We need to continue to tell the story and tell stories and personalize this, that it's more than just a number on a piece of paper. It's more than a cost. It is how impactful these services are to people. So I think that's going to be a really, really important key as well. Just to touch on a few of the things in the bill that were not Medicaid related, there are going to be some changes to SNAP, which is Indiana's the food stamps program. There's going to be some work requirements that are added to that. There's changes on how federal funding funds public education. That will be interesting to see how that flows down to the states. That may be changing, for instance, how much money schools have or the state has to pay for things in public schools like aids or therapies or inclusion supports. I think that's going to be really important to pay attention to, and that's another thing that we're going to be tracking. Um, Housing support generally, there was less federal funding overall, which probably means there's probably going to be less housing vouchers. How that's going to apply in the state, we don't know yet. Another thing that we're going to have to kind of pay attention to. Some of the other things that were included, there were some tax cuts that were included. If you ever heard of they're called the Trump tax cuts. They were set to expire. This bill expended those and extended those, especially as it relates to corporations. That was a big change. They're putting some more limits on how the federal government can spend non-defense funding. That was included in the bill. They increased military spending. This was a massive, massive federal bill that is much more than just Medicaid. But I wanted to focus on the Medicaid changes and what we know now. But just know that this was a huge bill with a ton of moving parts. It was hundreds and hundreds of pages, this bill was. So you can only imagine how many changes were happening in that big of a bill. But you know, we know some of the changes. We don't know all the changes because a lot of the changes are going to happen at the state level, right? So now we know what the money is and what those changes are. The states really got to make those decisions and say, okay, this is how we're going to change. What we do know for sure is there are going to be fewer federal dollars coming into Indiana's Medicaid program. We know that. That's true, right? Based on the budget bill, there's going to be fewer federal dollars, less money from the federal government coming into Indiana's Medicaid program. And so that will force the state to make real, possibly structural decisions about how Medicaid's funded and delivered. And that's why we're continuing to advocate, and we just don't know what that is yet. So those are really, really the things that we're paying attention to, and is going to keep us busy, and hopefully keep you all busy on sharing your stories and advocating that negative changes aren't going to happen. But those are the main things, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I may not know all the answers, but I will try to answer whatever questions you might have.
Hey Tom, I have a question about the SNAP benefits.
Yeah,
You know how he wants us to work 20 hours plus?
right.
Like, say if we are on SSI and SSA, would that affect us?
So there are even so similar to the work requirements in Medicaid, the work requirements for SNAP do include exemptions. And so people with disabilities and people caring for people with disabilities can be exempted out of those requirements. So
Okay.
likely there are exemptions out. But again, there might be paperwork requirements for those exemptions to be exempt out. So it's really important to figure out what's going to be required to prove that, either the work requirements or that you're exempt from the work requirements. So that'll be important to pay attention to.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So how with being on it, how can you work full time while being on it?
On what? Which one? Medicaid or SNAP? Medicaid?
Yeah.
So the requirement for the work requirements, if someone has to do the work requirements, because again, a lot of people are going to be exempted out, so they don't have to if you're exempted out. So there's going to be a category of people that don't need to do the work requirements. But if you are required, then it's a 80 hours per month requirement. So that's about 20 hours a week of either work, if you go to school, or if you volunteer, that would all count toward the requirements. But again, there's a lot of people that are going to be not have to do that because they're exempted out, including there are some requirements specifically for people with disabilities that may be exempt from doing it. It's just going to be kind of what that is and who applies.
I go to school to try to get my GED. Would that count?
That yeah, I mean, the school requirements are counting as long as that meets the hour. If you are required to do it, which you may not have to be, once it's in effect, schooling does count.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
We only meet 2 times a week for like 3 hours.
Yeah, so
each
that'll
day,
be
so
the first question will be, and again, we'll get more information out about some of these details once the bill passes. A lot of the federal agencies are going to put out their requirements and put out their rules, and we will do a good job of trying to get that information out to everyone. And then we'll know more about how they're going to apply those exemptions and how and who has to do it. And we'll certainly do that so people stay informed.
okay, thank you.
Yep.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I was gonna like work out for me and all this stuff, and how the behavioral
So what was the
system
question?
works. How does this work?
So Josh, are you asking about behavior supports?
Yeah.
Okay. Tom, could you talk a little bit about some of the waiver changes as it refers to
Yeah.
behavior consulting?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good question. So that's another big topic area. It's obviously separate from the big beautiful bill, federal budget bill, but there are some, and that's a good thing to talk about right now because there are proposed changes to the HCBS waivers in Indiana, and the comment period just opened up last week, and it's really important to. We talked about telling your story. It's really important that if you agree or disagree for some of those changes, that you make comments. And so, relative to the behavioral services, what they're proposing is a cap on how many hours can be utilized per week. And so, I think that's going to be, I want to be clear. What's proposed under the waivers is not set in stone yet. It is not necessarily what's going to happen. This is opening it up for comment, meaning this is what they're proposing to do. And so after they get comments, they might change their mind, and they might change some of the things that are in there. But what is being proposed is that they're proposing to what they say is reconfigure behavior support services, and there'll be an hourly cap potentially on those services. We don't know if that's going to come into effect or not. But I want to stress that if some of these things are impactful to you, if either good or bad, it's really important to make comments in that comment period so that you can tell them how this is a good idea or a bad idea. And that comment period is open until, I don't know if you guys talked about it or not yet, but it's open until August 8th. And I think it'd be really important, Noah, to get that information out to figure out how best you want to get the comments in.
I would also like to add the ARC of Indiana is having an Ask the ARC about the proposed waiver changes. That's going to be on July 24th, Thursday, July 24th. See if I can get the link for that. So Carly from our office will be going over those proposed changes.
Yeah, that will be really, really a good one to attend to learn more about details about, again, what's being proposed. And these, the ones that are just issued for open for public comment, I think they're wanting them to go into effect in like December, like winter of this year.
So, Tom, I know that you mentioned about the waiver having a cap on it. What if you're paying out of the pocket or a different insurance? Would there also be a cap on that?
So the only
for like the services, you know,
yeah,
for
that's
like,
that's a good question, Aaron. So no, if other insurance is paying for it, this is only changing what is being the services under the HDMS waiver. So that's the caps will apply to what the waiver is paying for. So if you're paying out of pocket, if you're utilizing other insurance, then that's not affected by what's being posed in the waiver amendments. Good question. Any other questions?
Okay, so I have another question.
Mhm.
So if I know this is a broad topic, but if I were to talk about this to our self-advocate group, how do I go about talking about it to the self-advocates that so they can understand what is going on?
It's a good question. I mean, it's a very complicated subject, and there's a lot of changes and things that are moving. So, I think it might be best to try to um, use some of the information that we put out, and share that information with your group. I know that we're also going to do, I don't have the dates. I don't know, Becky, if you have the dates of our town hall meetings, that may be a good opportunity to learn more. The Ask the Arcs are good opportunities to learn more. So you could suggest that like for instance, on the waiver changes, you might want to put that information out to your local chapter and say, hey, the Arc of Indiana is doing one of these Ask the Arcs on the waiver changes. And so they have the opportunity to hear it from Carly and ask any questions they might have. So then you don't have to try to answer those questions that they have. They could just have it to Carly too. That may be the best for some of that.
We'll also be
So
sending out the recording of this statewide to all of our chapters, Katie, so you can provide them with this recording as well.
okay.
It's very helpful.
And where can I find what we talk about?
I would
If I were
recommend
to look it up.
The this recording or the Ask the Arc stuff or just the general information we've been talking about.
Yeah.
So if you get any of the Arc of Indiana emails, we've been trying to break down a lot of these changes in those emails. So like for instance, we have a legislative update that goes out every week in the state session. And then we're sending it periodically as things happen after session. And so if you haven't signed up for that, I bet Noah could probably send the information out to all of you to sign up for those. But we really try to break down during the Indiana State session kind of what's happening, but also outside of it, we're trying to break down these changes too, and really try to educate on what's happening there. That may be a good spot for it.
hey, Tom, I had another quick question. I know
Mhm.
that you were talking about the work requirements. Um, I have a daughter that lives in a group home that's being funded by the state because it's considered like institution. I'm just sort of concerned because she can work or be volunteer. Would those 80 hours be exempted because it is considered like institutionalized uh group home setting, or
For your
would they
daughter?
look at it? Yeah, or would they look at it because with her being capable um of going out into the community setting uh to um to volunteer for work, would they be like, okay, well, since you're capable of doing that, would they see that as, okay, you have to go out and put in the 80 hours?
Yeah, very likely she would be exempted out from the work requirements. So, like I said, there in the there's going to be a list of people who are exempt, who don't have to complete those work requirements, whether it be work or school or volunteering. And there's going to be different definitions, but like for instance, receiving SSI is going to be one of those that makes people exempt. So very likely your daughter would not have to complete those work requirements to continue Medicaid. But again, as we get more information about how that's going to be applied, what people may need to show the exemption, we'll certainly get that information out.
Okay. And also too, I know like the mailing system is not very good. So would they see that as also another exempt? I'm just worried about these other individuals because, concerned like, uh, I know you were like, oh, make sure that you get it in on time, but also, the postal service is not very,
I know. It's a very,
so,
very real concern. Yes.
so what's your opinion on that?
So, whenever you send something, it's important to make copies of it, keep copies of it, and note the date that you're sending things. But part of that's receiving it from the state as well. And so, if that happens, you can argue that you didn't get it on time. You can kind of note, some of those things, but that's kind of outside of your control. And Aaron, I completely agree. Our mail system is not the quickest, and sometimes things take longer than they should. But it's very important that when you're submitting paperwork, if you can do it online, do it online. But if not, then make copies of what you're sending and note the date so that if it comes back to it, you can always say, no, I sent it on this date. Here's the copy and all these things. But it is a concern, and it's things that we see now even on eligibility, things that are happening. And that's part of the concern, is that when you're adding more hoops and more eligibility checks, there's going to be more likely that's going to happen, is because it's just happening more, right? So that is a concern. Anybody else have any other questions?
Sorry, I had my house manager Darlene hop on so she could know what's going on with the new budget and stuff. And could you like go briefly over it again for her, cause just so that she knows what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of just kind of generally, there's going to be some work requirements that we're going to need to look at and see who has to do those and who doesn't have to do those. There's going to be more eligibility checks. So every 6 months, there's going to be requirements instead of every year. And then kind of generally speaking, it's going to be interesting to see how the state funds their piece of Medicaid, because there's going to be some changes related to that. That'll be less impactful for everyone. But those are the big highlights, is that there's going to be more requirements, and it's going to be important to timely respond and check on those requirements to make sure that people are answering everything they need to answer, unfortunately. But yeah, I do
Thank
believe
you.
that the recording is going to be available too, if she wants to look back at it.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
I can send that recording out to Darlene.
Yes. Thank you, Noah.
Anybody have anything else?
One question I have, Tom, is what are we hearing when it comes to some of the agency cuts that were happening near the beginning of this year, particularly at the Social Security Administration? I know there's been a lot of litigation back and forth about the rehiring process. Where are we at currently with that?
Well, there was actually a Supreme Court decision just on Monday. So after all of those federal agency changes were happening, where a lot of people were being laid off or let go, you mentioned Social Security. There's also a lot at the Department of Education. A lot of states sued separately to prevent that from happening. And on Monday, the Supreme Court made a decision that on one of those lawsuits that involved the Department of Education, it basically allowed them to do it. And so I think if that's any indication, then those cuts that were being proposed and maybe have been paused by some courts are probably going to be allowed to happen. And so that's going to be, again, something to watch. But we've been waiting for courts to kind of take action on some of those lawsuits. And, the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in our land, kind of spoke on Monday and says the Department of Education can at least move forward with the cuts they had planned on making. So good question. All right. Well, I'm gonna pass it back to you, Noah, if that's there's no more questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming today, Tom. Can we all give him a big round of applause?
Okay. Well, thanks. It was nice seeing everybody, and I'm gonna hop off now if that's okay.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate you.
You're welcome. Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
Tom.
Have a good rest of your day.
Now, let me go ahead and share. So if you enjoyed today's training, if you could please scan this QR code. Is that coming through all right, Becky?
I'm not
Yes,
Becky, but yeah.
Yep, and I'll put the link in the chat.
Perfect.
Hang on, no, I'm gonna scan it with my other phone.
No worries.
I'm on my iPhone, so I didn't get on my computer today.
Noah, can you share a little bit about why what this QR code is for and why we're asking for people to scan it?
Absolutely. That was what I was about to go into next. So yeah, the reason why we fill out these surveys is because this training is brought to us by the Governor's Council for People with Disabilities here in Indiana. So they are the funder of Self Advocates of Indiana. And so any feedback we get from these trainings, these presentations, these statewide Zooms, filling out the survey is really helpful for us and kind of gives GCPD some of that information so that they understand, kind of what went on in the training and how people felt about it. So a little bit of time to fill out that survey. And if any of you need assistance with the survey, please let me know and I'd be happy to help.